Welcome to your weekly program, Al-Ahdan, the show that brings the other side of Arab American to your living room. We all know that right after 9/11, the Muslims are reacting in two different ways, especially Muslim Americans. One camp wants to bring Islam and kind of westernize Islam to the Americans and Western audience, and try to comfort the American that Islam really believe in all this secular Western ideas and you know, democracy and women and all that. Bring Islam to the Constitution of Americans, and comfort the American. The other one wants to kind of bring the American secularism to Islam, and it's just forget about you know, 1500 years and forget about the tradition. There's no hope of following you know, the tradition, Islamic culture and religion and Sharia and Quran, whatever. We should all follow the secular model. And for the first one, the one who really want to kind of domesticize, westernize Islam to the American audience, led by Dr. Gamal Badawi. He really has a lot of writing and a lot of lecturing, and Badawi, very well respected, brilliant thinker, and he really tried to explain Islam to the American people in a more modern and kind of a softer side of Muslims to the American people. And both of those thinker or leaders, Islamic leaders, or kind of you know, activists, were at the University of St. Thomas, and I was fortunate enough to meet both of them, and I've done 2 interviews with them. The first one is going to be with Dr. Jamal Badawi, and we talked to him about his ideas and thoughts, what are the future of the dialogue between Islam and the West, or Muslims and the West, and we're going to share this interview with you today. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Since 9/11, the tragedy of 9/11 really redefined Muslim American, especially in this country, and no one is really telling the Muslim Americans or Muslim and talking about Islam like our guest today. Our guest is Dr. Jamal Badawi. He's a professor of Emirates at St. Mary University, where he taught in both the Department of Management and the Department of Religion and Studies. Dr. Badawi is the author of several works on Islam. He also researched, designed, and presented more than 400 segment television series on Islam, shows in many locals. Welcome to the show, Dr. Badawi. It's very nice of you there. I know you are the most sought after Muslims, and for the good reason. There is other Muslims that have been thought for other.
It's an overestimate, but we try to whatever little we can.
Yeah, that's fine. Really, I'm very intrigued by this, because there's a lot of people talking about Islam and talk about Muslims from, you know, both sides, and it seems like in Islam's there is no like hierarchy of some sort, that we have somebody like the Pope that he represents what should we think and how should we think. So 9/11 and hit us in the head, and we just kind of trying to figure out what's going on. So before even we talk about some specific issue in general, is there somebody, you know, like who represent Islam or Muslims, and who talks in the name of Islam or in the name of Muslims, and who should we listen to, and who should we say, yeah, this is it and this is not? How differentiate between Islam and Muslims?
While there is no one single figure, as you said, or institution parallel somehow to the concept of the papacy, In every religion, in every science even we study, we refer to people who are competent, who studied these subjects in depth. So I would say when it comes to understanding theological aspects of Islam, we have to refer to and defer to those who are knowledgeable. But of course, because there is a great deal of dynamism and flexibility in the teaching of Islam also, it's quite possible that even those who follow the proper rules of interpretation, that there could be sometimes differing interpretation within certain range of some issues. So even among trusted scholars, one is not obligated to follow one or the other. One can compare and look into the evidence and the suitability of their opinions, but there is no religious obligation as such to follow one.
This is demanded of the Muslims themselves?
It is a requirement, of course, of anyone who doesn't understand anything, even outside of religion.
Even a secular
exactly. And when you have a problem in economics, you refer to an economist who specializes. But you don't have to believe him. You can compare with others.
So there is a choice there at the end of the
absolutely.
day. Let me recite some of the things that you had in one of your books here. When dealing with the Islamic perspective of any topic, there should be a clear distinction between the normative teaching of Islam and the diverse culture practice among Muslims, which may or may not, which is in itself what you're saying, because there is a huge difference between what's going on in Pakistan or what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in Algeria, and what's going on in Kosovo. This is all Muslims, but the reality and their history, it really reflects different application of Islam and Muslims. So, talk to us a little bit about this, the clear distinction between that normative, because you can say this with any text, that people say you have to follow text. But in Islam and Muslims, there's a huge distinction.
I think you're quite right.
Yeah.
Because in principle, in any community of faith, any religion for that world religion, certainly things like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there are the instructions and teachings according to the scripture, which should be authoritative and should be regarded as the acid test or the criteria by which you can evaluate the claims of those who say we are Muslims, Christians, or Jews for that matter. So the faith can be normative in that sense, but the actions of people as humans might be affected by their shortcoming, either outright violation or misunderstanding or misbehavior. So we cannot attribute these deviations from the faith to the faith itself. And like I said, I stand on equal ground on the same level field. I think this applies also to the Christian community or Jewish community. If one were to understand Christianity and the noble teaching of Christ in the light of crusades or inquisition or crime in the streets, definitely will be doing something wrong, because these people are doing that not because they're following Christianity, but because of human shortcoming. But
that's interesting, because when Christians mess up, like World War II or Hitler, or go invade another country because God is telling me so, evildoers, all that, we don't resort that we say Christianity is really evil. But one bunch of terrorists, which is outlawed even in Muslim country, do one single act, we resort to question Islam. So is this a fair, is Islam getting the short shift of this? Because it's always accused of behavior of the Muslims as not really the other way around when it comes to Christianity or Judaism?
I believe there is a great deal of unfairness here, especially as reflected in the use of terms such as Islamic terrorism or Muslim terrorism.
Islamic fascism.
Or Islamic fascism for that matter. When the fighting and killing was going on in Northern Ireland, I'm not taking one side or the other, but there was definitely something that neither Catholics or Protestant, level-minded ones accepted. Nobody said that this was Catholic, Protestant, or Christian terrorism. When some of the Jewish settlers massacred people, like the massacre in Hebron of people praying in the holy month of Ramadan, nobody said that this is Judaic terrorism, and I opposed to attribute the term of religion to crimes or shortcoming of people. But you're quite right. It is unfortunate that nobody, for example, called Timothy McVeigh a Christian terrorist, but when some extremist people among Muslims, and extremists are found among all religious faith, automatically the term Islamic is attributed. And it seemed to convey the false impression that this is part of religion, like you talk about Islamic prayer, Islamic fasting, Islamic terrorism, as if it's...
Yeah, there is Islamic culture, but it's not, no, there is no Islamic fascism.
Exactly. So this deviation should not be counted on the faith. So there is singling out Muslims, unfortunately, with the negative terms such as these. I think that need to be changed.
Well, since 9/11 and the tragedy of 9/11, Muslims are becoming very defensive. They are getting out of their way to go and talk to the other people, explain our religion. And it seems like Islam in the last, I don't know, 300-400 years, always defined by, despotic leaders and violent, always defined in the context of violence. Mm-hmm. And now you come into here and you try to change that. You try to talk and redefine Islam to the non-Muslims. So what are the biggest issues that you are facing as someone who really genuine and he really cares about bridging the gap and having a dialogue between two, or three major monolithic faces?
Sometimes when people talk about being defensive and so on, it can be taken sometimes in the negative sense that you're just trying to mold or change your faith in order to suit others and be politically correct. But there is also a positive sense of clarifying issues that people misunderstood. And I always try to be optimistic, and I hold that there are some people who might be sincere, might be looking for truth, but they have got the wrong information. So it behooves those who have the possible answer to these questions to contribute to the promotion of better understanding. It's not defensive in the negative sense. But to answer your question directly, perhaps one of the most clear and glaring errors is to claim that Islam teaches holy war. There is absolutely no Arabic equivalent in the entire Arabic Quran of the English term holy war. None whatsoever. In fact, holy war as a term is an oxymoron. There is nothing holy about bloodshed, destruction, and human suffering. Thirdly, why should the term holy war, which is not in the Quran, be projected in Muslims when in fact it arose in Europe and under certain circumstances where some fanatics falsely in the name of Christianity committed all kind of atrocities. Lexically speaking, holy war means a war waged on behalf of one religion against the other, which means the only reason is different religion. There is absolutely no such concept in the Quran that you fight people because they have a different religion. The Quran says you can fight aggressors or oppressors irrespective of their religion. And by the way, in chapter 49, even Muslims are committing.
What's happening in the history that Muslims fought other Muslims?
Exactly. I mean, if you can't stop them by peaceful means, even Muslims could. So it's not a matter of religion; it is a matter of aggression, in fact. But the unfortunate thing, in spite of the clarity of this concept, is that people somehow mix between jihad and holy war and terrorism. These are poles apart. The concept of jihad is a very noble concept, because literally it means to exert maximum effort or strive. As the Quran indicates, that striving could be for self-purification, that is inner jihad, for self-purification. That's the more important one, the foundation.
The bigger jihad.
Exactly, bigger jihad. There is jihad used in the Quran in a sense of struggling or exerting effort in order to look after the poor. Zakah, the payment of charity to the poor, is called zakah. Making your arguments, condemning what is wrong and praising what is right, is jihad with the tongue, or jihad with the pen. There is, yes, another form of jihad in the legal sense, the process of interpretation of Islamic law so as to apply to current and contemporary problem is called ijtihad. It's another action.
Is it different from jihad?
It is derived. It is derived from the same identical root from which, because it means the scholar is exerting, striving to understand,
even struggling with
exactly,
isn't it?
And exerting maximum effort to come up with a sensible answer to certain question. But yes, there is one form of jihad which is combative jihad. According to the Quran, it is allowed only in one of two cases.
Conditions.
I couldn't find a third. One is repelling unprovoked aggression. And it says in the Quran, actually in chapter 2, verse 190, fight in the way of God those who fight against you. And I think it's consistent with human nature and international law to defend yourself if you could not do it peacefully by the use of force to repel aggression.
Well, a lot of non-Muslim exerted that jihad in Vietnam and other non-Muslim countries.
Well, I don't know whether it's applicable in Vietnam, but that may not necessarily be
no, what I'm saying, you know,
against Nazism, for example.
Aggressive.
The fighting against the spread of Nazism or fascism was quite legitimate. But I'm not defending the method, like Dresden's carpet bombing and thing of that nature. But I mean, there was a cause there. The other justification is the oppression, severe oppression. Then there is nothing beyond that, in fact, which are quite normal and legitimate if peaceful means have been exhausted, and by observing also very strict code of conduct that make it poles apart from the notion of terrorism, of victimizing the innocents.
Those conditions of jihad, were they observed through when Muslims were in power and superpower?
Okay, there are two issues involved here. One, is it part of the teaching of Islam? And secondly, did Muslim observe it? Because this could be...
In that particular period when Islam was confident...
Right. I'm coming to that, but I want to also be honest and continuing consistently with my methodology that the normative teaching is the original. We cannot defend people when they fail to reach that level. As far as being part of Islamic teaching, it is there in the very words of the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him. He made it quite clear, even when people have a justification to fight back or to stop aggression, that they should not hurt a woman who is not fighting, a child, an elderly, a clergy of other religions, or as we call it today, generally non-combatants. He said that you could not mutilate the body of the dead, you cannot kill somebody who is injured already and does not represent danger to you, you cannot torture the prisoners of war, you cannot kill animals except as needed for food. Actually, I dare say that the Geneva Convention, the Fourth Geneva Conventions, and various laws and humanitarian laws pertaining to the unfortunate battlefield did not add much to what the Prophet of Islam taught 1400 years ago. Now, did Muslim observe that? I would be dishonest to say that yes, 100% throughout history, and try to glamorize this. But I would say the testimony of many even fair Western writers conclude that while Muslims committed mistakes, which is theirs, not because of the teaching, that generally speaking they have been much kinder than others. Go to John Esposito, Islam the Straight Path. When he compares and contrasts the action of some of the Crusaders, and again has nothing to do with Christianity, it was falsely attributed to Christianity, the action of the Crusaders when they went to Jerusalem, where their horses were treading in blood to their heels, men, women and children killed wholesale. And when Salahuddin, or Saladin as known in the West, entered into Jerusalem, stopping any killing, stopping any plundering of people's lives, giving people security and safety. The action of Richard the Lion-Hearted, when he went to one of the township and told Muslims, if you put your arms, you're safe. When they put their arms, they were all slaughtered. With the action of Salahuddin, he went actually to in hiding, disguised in order to provide medical help to Richard the Lion-Hearted. So there's a big contrast. I'm not saying.
And he was driven for a true faith, or just his personality? Well,
if you go to the history of Salahuddin, you find it as a person who was very pious, keeping night prayers and so on. So it is obvious there is connection between the mercy, even in the battlefield, that the Quran and the Prophet taught, and his action. But yes, there were incidents where they were not. But I think many historians will tell you that there is a big difference of the extent of...
But that's a fair comparison. You don't want to compare Islam when they are down in a very dark ages to Christianity when it's the top. Usually you compare equally with the same area when Muslims were confident in control, what's their behavior? Did they follow the teaching? And Christianity, when it's in control, Roman, whatever, would they follow it? I think that would be more
the comparison actually would have to be admission of sins, admission of wrong, but compare in relative terms.
I see.
It was a Western historian, I think Dalasi O'Leary, who said that the world has never known, he used the term conqueror, who are more just and more merciful than, he used the term Arabs, but he meant Muslims. But they were not perfect, but indeed it appears that the profound teaching of the faith, at least in the mind of many committed people, did help avoid more dramatic kind of wholesale killing.
One of the biggest issue that concern Americans here or non-Muslims, the suicide bombing and killing innocent. And I know you cannot compare violence. I mean, you cannot say, well, invasion of Iraq killed about 1 million people. Tell us, is there a difference between when the killing is a 5,000 bomb dropped in the middle of a city, or somebody just go and strap himself with something and go in a cafe in you know, in an occupied territory, whatever? How do you you look at all those violence?
I have absolutely no hesitation in stating my position that I made public in so many occasions, that my definition, and many people seem to be accepting that, of terrorism is that it is the victimization or targeting of the innocent, whether the culprit or the victim is a Muslim or any other faith community, and whether that victim is an individual, victim or culprit is an individual, a group, or a state for that matter. And I hope it's an impartial, inclusive terms of this. So it doesn't matter whether this kind of massive killing of innocent people deliberately is done by any entity, from small entity or big entity. What is wrong is wrong. What needs to be condemned must be condemned. So there is absolutely no justification. The thing that I mentioned just a few minutes ago about the clear, strict instruction of the Prophet of Islam of conduct and ethics, even in the unfortunate situation of battlefield, are quite clear, and that answer any question as to whether there is any connection between authentic Islamic teaching and the concept of terrorism. Definitely that is when you victimize people, or the so-called suicide bombing that targets civilians or people who are non-combatants. And unfortunately it's done not only intra-people or intra-faith, but interfaith, but intra-faith. In some cases, and there were Christians killing Christians in the Crusades. Also, when the Crusade descended into sectarian or Muslim killing Muslim, what is wrong is wrong, whether it's done my people, your people. We have to stand on the clear moral and ethical ground inherent in all the teaching of God to all prophets.
But that would be a little bit alien what's so-called the Western thinking and thought, because I think there is a belief in a legitimate violence, or you know, the idea of just war and not just war. And I think you know, violence by state, it's more accepted, and it doesn't bother a lot of Americans here. That you go and you go and invade and you know, millions, thousands of people get killed. But you know, a few people getting killed or shot, that really seems to rise. So there is a general acceptance of something called just violence or legitimate violence, and non-combatants or non-governmental violence. And you know,
you see, the term violence may have a lexical meaning, which simply means the use of force. But there is the acquired and connotative meaning of violence, which seem to be negative in the minds of people. An example: a policeman arresting by force a gunman who's shooting around randomly is using technically violence. But you wouldn't see in the paper or television that a policeman committed violence in arresting a gunman, for example. So it acquired a negative type of meaning. So that's why I prefer to use the term use of force, because the use of force could be legitimate, could be illegitimate. If you're using force where peaceful means failed and force is necessary, it is done by all, by individuals, by states, by groups, when you have to defend yourself. But the idea here of legitimacy of using violence, one, the cause must be right. I don't use force to steal or to rob someone else. So exactly, the aim and the purpose must be legitimate. I'm defending myself and my property and my honor, no problem. Secondly, I am using force proportionately and judiciously. So I'm not taking excuse that somebody committed violence, so he slapped me on the face, I kill him and his family altogether. This is wrong.
I see.
So even though the cause could be right, disproportionality is definitely wrong and unneeded. It is in that sense, perhaps, that my humble understanding that the concept of just war developed in the Catholic theology, for example, might not be that much different from Islam, because it says that you tried your peaceful means, you tried to minimize the losses, it is declared by legitimate authority, observing certain limits and so on, when absolutely necessary. But even some people are questioning that.
We have only 2 minutes, and I know we talked about this before, about a lot of people think Muslims and Islam inherently not inducing or not welcoming a minority or coexisting with non-Muslims. And I know it would be a miracle if we can cover that.
This is absolutely false, and I think they will have on the website of the Islamic Resource Group my presentation that went into details in that. But very briefly, this is totally wrong. It is based on total misunderstanding and mistranslation of a verse in the Quran that speaks about certain groups of non-believers in Islam who actually are mocking at Muslim, and the Quran simply say, don't take them for your protectors. Actually, people translate it, friends, it's not, don't take them as protectors. So it deals only with those minorities. In the Quran, it allows a Muslim man to marry a believing Jewish or Christian woman, and relationship with a wife is even more intimate than friendship in itself. Chapter 60, exactly, well, at least normatively speaking. In the Quran, in chapter 60, verse 8, it says, anyone who's not a Muslim, I'm just rewording to make it quick, anyone who's not a Muslim, who coexist peacefully with Muslims, that does not fight them because of their religion or commit aggression against them or oppression by driving them out of their homes, are entitled to be treated in kindness and justice. All other verses that is quoted in the media are verses that speak about dealing with aggressors or war criminals in the battlefield. It is not to be generalizable. One must understand the historical and textual context.
Thank you so much. I'm sure you have more battles on this, and wish you well. Check his website, Dr. Jamal Badawi, more reasonable and talking about Islam and Muslim. Assalamu alaikum, and see you next week.
للدنيا تتعلم افتح بيبان مرسامي للدنيا تتعلم ويهون